Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. Apologize for the sun. Hey, so if you've if you've clicked on this video, you already kind of know what it's about. And you already know who Tucker Carlson is. That's why you clicked on it. And normally I don't really pay much attention to what talking heads on any TV channel or purported news show have to say. I kind of do my own research, read stuff, make my own decisions, base it on a lot of things. But something that Tucker Carlson said last night kind of pissed me off. And that's why I think he's a piece of shit. But what I'd like you to do is stick with me till the end of this video, because I'm going to explain why I think that. And I think my explanation should be important to every American, because what he's doing is basically questioning a fundamental tenet of our democracy. In fact, a tenet of our democracy that predates the Republic. So let's get into it. So obviously the biggest news story of, for quite some time, actually, other than maybe coronavirus or the election, it has been this trial in Minneapolis over the George Floyd murder by a Minneapolis police officer named Derek Chauvin. So yesterday, the trial finished up, and the jury found that Chauvin was guilty of 3 different counts of homicide. And let's be clear, homicide simply means a person being killed by another person. That's what the word means. So manslaughter is a homicide offense. Murder 2 is a homicide offense. Murder 3 is a homicide offense. I was never licensed to practice law in Minnesota. I'm not super familiar with Minnesota criminal law, but those were the 3 charges. And the charges are basically, so like murder 3, a lesser included offense, I believe, is murder 2 and manslaughter. And murder 2, lesser included offense, is the manslaughter. But in speaking of the verdict, what Tucker Carlson said really struck a chord with me. And, he says a lot of outrageous stuff. He badmouths women in the military. He talks about replacement theory, which is just, some racist bullshit and ahistorical. But he said about the jurors some stuff that really bothered me. And I'm going to tell you what he said. I'm going to give you a little bit of what he said, but it'll be enough to make that point. And then I want to talk about juries and jurors, but also the bigger picture. So he said that the jurors, and now I'm quoting, the jurors, quote, spoke for many in this country, end quote, by coming to the decision, meaning the verdicts, quote, please don't hurt us. In other words, the jurors were like predisposed to convict Chauvin because they were afraid of riots and Black Lives Matter and all this other stuff. And so and regardless of how you feel about police officers, law enforcement, police brutality, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, regardless of how you feel about any of that, what Carlson's saying here is that, first, he's questioning the integrity and the sacrifice of the 12 jurors. And I know it's probably out there in the public arena, but I don't know the demographic makeup of the jury. I don't know how many blacks were on it, if any. I don't know how many whites were on it, if any. I don't know how many men, if any, women, if any. I don't know if there were Latinos, Latinas, if any. I don't know college education, blue collar, unemployed, Republican, Wiccan, Democrat. I don't know any of that, right? But here's what I do know about juries. And let me just say that I tried hundreds and hundreds of cases over the 16 years that I practiced law. Hundreds of cases, maybe over 1,000. I just don't know. Because sometimes I would do maybe as many as 10 cases in a day. A lot of times it's just very quick, but it still would be a trial or some adversarial proceeding. But I never had a case where I tried in front of a jury. Just never did. They got settled or whatever. But I do know a little bit about juries. And here's what I know. Nobody in their right mind wants to be on jury duty. Okay? It oftentimes is emotionally difficult in a case like this where there's death. It's often boring, like in a securities fraud case. People just don't want to hear lawyers droning on about complex investment strategies. And it often is very disruptive. So just let's think about this for a second. There are 12 jurors in this case. Each one of them spent 3+ weeks dealing with this trial. And when I say dealing with it, I mean putting their lives on hold. And by the way, jurors do get paid by the day, but it's usually something that barely covers parking if you got to go into a downtown area. It's usually like $15 a day, $25 a day. And then you don't even get it right away. I think you got to wait for a check, right? But the jurors all went through a process called voir dire. And in voir dire, it's like this case, again, I don't know the particulars, but it wouldn't surprise me that there were at least 5 times as many jurors called for jury duty for this case as were seated on the jury. So maybe like 60 people, maybe 120. It could be a huge number. They all came to a courthouse. The bailiffs shuffled them around from room to room. They all filled out these lengthy questionnaires, then waited while attorneys went over the questionnaires, then got called into the courtroom. Now, attorneys have preemptory challenges. So, like, a juror could be stricken for no stated reason, and the defense gets a certain number, prosecution gets a certain number. Then after all of those challenges are exhausted, like the judge doesn't even question, why are you striking this person? Doesn't matter. And then they can start objecting based on information they have about the jurors on the questionnaire. So for instance, in a case like this, nobody that's like has any family members that are police officers are probably going to be seated on the jury. Prosecution would object to that, and the judge would probably agree. Conversely, nobody that says, yeah, my brother was killed by the cops, my cousin's in jail, he was framed, none of that's going to pass by either. And then there are going to be all sorts of other reasons why somebody might be stricken. And sometimes it could be that they just say something either they truly believe or maybe a little crazy. Like if you don't want to be on a jury, the easiest thing to do is say, well, I think the defendant's guilty. I mean, why are we here? That's an easy way to get stricken from a jury. Or the other thing is, well, the cops wouldn't arrest somebody if they were innocent. Or conversely, the cops lie about everything and they probably framed this guy. Whatever, if you say anything kind of outrageous, they're probably going to strike you. So anyway, it gets whittled down. And in this case, it got whittled down to these 12 people. And I don't know if there were any alternates. But every day of this trial, they got up early in the morning, went to a courthouse, and listened to pretty compelling but emotional, tragic testimony. And without regard to the credibility of any witnesses for either the prosecution or the defense, I could tell you that just from what I know, the video evidence in this case was quite compelling. Okay? And so they looked at everything. But here's the thing to keep in mind. As a jury, they would have cast votes on each one of the charges. Okay? So they basically cast a total of 36 votes. And every single vote was that the defendant was guilty. Every single one. Like, this wasn't a case that could have gone either way in the jury's mind. Because if it was, they probably would have come back with kind of like you'd say in boxing, a split decision. Like, they'd convict on the manslaughter and maybe the murder too, but not the most serious charge or something like that. But that's not what happened. They came back fairly quickly, and it was unanimous, and it was totally, unquestioned conviction on all three charges. So for him to badmouth these people and suggest that they shirked their duty because they were afraid of somebody, is just an absolute abomination. It's just ridiculous, okay? These people deserve better. They stopped their lives. They did their best. And my sense of it is, juries always, or almost always, every juror tries to do their duty, okay? O.J. Simpson case. I think the jurors did their duty. I watched a lot of that. I think generally jurors try to do their duty. And I think these people did. And I don't think they were worried about riots or, violence in the street. I think they were just trying to do the best job they could. And they looked at a compelling pile of evidence, considered everything, and came back with the verdict they came back with. So Tucker Carlson's a piece of shit for picking on these people. They just want to go back to their lives, okay? They did the best they could. And whether or not you agree with what the decision was, you can't fault them for doing their civic duty. Lots of people try hard to avoid jury duty. Okay, so that's the first point I want to make. But the other point, and this is more important, is that his statements basically try to question the entire jury system. Like, he's like, oh, well, this is a foregone conclusion. It was in the bag for the prosecution. We can't trust juries. But a trial by jury is enshrined in the Constitution, a trial by your peers, right? And so when somebody does something wrong, they have the right to a jury trial. But here's the most important thing to remember about this jury trial. Chauvin, or his attorney, but really Chauvin, could have elected a bench trial, I believe. Again, I don't know Minnesota criminal procedure, but I believe he could have selected a bench trial. Bench trial means the judge decides your guilt. So normally, for instance, in the Freddie Gray case, all those police officers in Baltimore that were being tried, they selected a bench trial. Why? Because they thought the evidence did not support the charges against them. They felt like their best shot was with a judge. Chauvin's attorneys and he obviously thought that maybe they could get at least one juror to say he wasn't guilty. But they didn't think that they were going to get it easier with the judge. Otherwise, they'd have chosen a bench trial. So Tucker Carlson is a piece of shit, because he badmouthed people he doesn't know who were just trying to do their jobs. And he's a piece of shit for questioning the efficacy and the validity of the jury trial system in this country. So if you've come this far, I appreciate it. Now, if you want to comment, like, subscribe, whatever, I'm happy to hear it, and I'm happy to discuss it. And again, I have an opinion about the case itself, but this isn't about the case itself. This is about people doing the best they can in a super difficult situation and doing it well. And it's about the fundamentals of American democracy, and somebody that has a really big microphone, a lot of viewers, undermining a tenet of democracy, undermining the foundation of our democracy. I don't like it, and I think he's a piece of shit for it. So thanks for tuning in. See you next time.